All right. Now you have to make it convicting. Thank you very much.
Let me see if I can find an example.
Now don't find an example.
I gotta find an example. I know it's gonna hurt.
Already has. Knock it off. You're listening to Reason Together, the podcast for Christians who think about stuff. And I am here in person with my great friend, Thomas Balsamo. We are actually, well, I say live. We're always like live. We don't ever do it dead. But, I mean, we're in person, and it's different technologically speaking. We've got a little bit different setup. And so hopefully Derek doesn't quit after this episode by us throwing in these different issues. But
we can't mess this up today.
No. So I have to be careful not to like talk over you 15 times during the episode, because that can't be, pulled down.
No.
But anyway, this is, we've got a full list. We're not going to hit everything today, but we've got plenty to talk about. And we both just came back from a wedding down in beautiful North Carolina, and saw some of our listeners there, and we're even given questions as we were in conversations. Oh, you ought to consider this for your podcast, or what do you think about this?
That was neat.
Yeah, that is neat. And so you made it back safe. We made it back safe. It's a 12.5-hour drive, and we took it all in one shot there.
Yeah. And we're here now, broadcasting from the metropolis of Wayland, Missouri.
Yeah. If you can't find it, look for the Flying J. Okay. Well, anyway, we want to thank our patrons over at patreon.com/reason together. And we thank you so much for your support. Those who have signed on to support this podcast on an episode-by-episode basis, all the way from basic subscriptions to an elite subscription.
Yes.
And that being said,
we have a new, she's not a new patron. In fact, she may have been our first patron.
I think she may have been our first patron, yes.
So we're honored to announce that our first patron, Joyce, has upgraded to elite level.
Yes.
In fact, I don't even think we had an elite level when she first signed on. Maybe we did. I don't remember, but we're encouraged by that. So thank you, Joyce. We appreciate you upgrading. If you are also a patron of this podcast and you didn't know you can upgrade, take a lesson from Joyce. You can certainly upgrade. And we're for it.
Yeah, we're for it. We agree.
Yeah. If you're not a patron, however, though, and you'd say, I've listened to these guys for a while. I think I'm going to take the plunge. I'm going to go and support them on Patreon. You can do that at patreon.com/reason together. Again, that's patreon.com/reason together. And just pick one of the tier levels there, and you can become a supporter of the podcast if you think we've earned that. Of course, you can just continue to listen for free if that's your cup of tea as well. Just be sure to thank our patrons for enabling us to keep this content free.
Yeah, and another suggestion is you could go over, you like what you're listening to, and whether you're a patron or not, you could go over to the, is it podcast now? They used to call it the iTunes.
It's now Apple Podcasts.
And leave us a 5-star review. We have some to read off to you today. I like this one here from Holly Ollie 9192. Holly Ollie. These podcasts remind me of the type of conversations you have with your best friend until midnight. Yeah, that sums up how it started.
Is this a 5-star review, by the way?
This is a 5-star review. They discuss questions that you may wonder about, but wouldn't necessarily bring up in a casual conversation with just anyone. Mm-hmm. Right. There isn't often a hard and fast answer to the questions given. However, the discussion is great to listen to and gives you some food for thought to start seeking biblical convictions on various issues. Great summary there. Thanks so much, Holly Ollie.
Yep, we do appreciate it.
For that.
This is another one here from Pilot in Progress. Pilot in Progress. It's a 5-star review. He says, I've really enjoyed listening to the podcasts from the beginning. They challenge my thinking and often provide additional perspectives to many subjects that I may not have thought of. I highly recommend subscribing and join me in supporting them on Patreon. Thanks a lot, Pilot in Progress.
Yeah, from JCal1217, I'll be honest, I'm not a super deep thinker, and I wasn't sure I would be able to keep up with the banter, as they call it. but I find it's down to earth and palatable. Wonderful. I really enjoy the relevancy of the topics and the honest back and forth. Plus, these guys have a good camaraderie. I enjoy the humor and find this podcast very helpful and insightful. That's great. Thanks, JCal.
Yeah, appreciate it. And one more 5-star review. This one is from Brew93. It says, Daniel and Thomas do an excellent job asking why, while still keeping the discussion fresh and entertaining. I appreciate their willingness to approach topics with an open mind, while always seeking out the scriptural support for their conclusions. Thank you, Brew. Appreciate it.
Yep.
If you'd like to leave us a review, which really helps the podcast immensely. Let's say you're not able to be a supporter on Patreon. There is one way that you can help support us, and that is to leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. That helps us get in front of more, I almost said eyes, but ears. So if you want to help us in that way, go over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star rating, and write down a quick, few sentences review, and we'd appreciate that very much.
While we're packing this in here, let me tell you also, we're now on Spotify. So if that's something that you have a subscription to, you can find us there on Spotify. And I also wanted to mention that if you look at our website, reasontogether.fm, you'll find there all of our podcast episodes. You can click on them, listen to them right from the site, see our links to our show notes, things like that, right? Okay. But the other thing now is that you might notice a site redesign because we are soon going to be adding blog articles or blog posts. So not only do you get to hear, but you can also read some content from us and a number of other folks as well. We're working on a list there. So that's in the working. You'll see that that's kind of soon coming, but you can be looking forward to some blog posts in the future.
Yeah, and we actually had the website professionally redone by someone who does this for people. So, and it wasn't me. So we've actually had this professionally redone. You'll see there's some motion graphics happening on the homepage if you're looking at a desktop, and it just looks a lot more sharp than I was able to make it as an amateur. But yeah, we've got some exciting things coming here down the pike for reasontogether.fm, so stay tuned to that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And if you kind of find yourself like really mulling over some of the things you've listened to on the podcast, you could just sort of sit there and stare at our website.
Yes, watch the brains fly in from the side. Our logo with the brains in it, right? It actually moves on the homepage now. Just watch the brains fly.
Wow, I got to go look at that now.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what are we gonna talk about first? I've got one that I was interested in, but boy, there's a list here. What is there one that kind of?
If you've already got one in mind that you want to hit, let's go with that, and we'll roll with it.
Okay, this one was asked while we were recently together in North Carolina, and somebody was talking about the expression, I miss you, and stating how it was maybe awkward or it was difficult to know how to respond when someone says, "Oh, I miss you so much," and you may feel like responding back, "I miss you too." And I think the struggle there was, is that honest? Because he was saying, okay, I don't think about you all the time. In fact, I haven't thought of you for 2 weeks. But now you say, I miss you, and I say, I miss you too. But is that really honest to say that I miss you when I haven't thought of you?
Yeah.
So what's your initial take on
I guess it depends on what you mean by...
Sorry, technical difficulty.
Yeah, we got technical.
Turn it on mute.
Since we're recording in person, we don't have Daniel's track and my track, where if one of us gets a phone call, we can mute our track momentarily. No, we're recording on the same track today, so we're committed.
That's right. So if you hear, all of a sudden, like our voices just go off. And you're like,
yes.
What happened? What? Too late.
Where was I? Oh, right. Do you miss me? The question, do you miss me? I think the word that comes to mind here is platitudes.
Okay.
If you're familiar with the word platitude, it's just kind of a thing you say that you don't necessarily mean. It's just kind of a thing to say. And the question is a platitude a lie? I think that's kind of what we're getting at, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And so to take that further, the question would then be, what do I mean by I miss someone?
Yes, that is a big part of it, because my wife said, I might say to somebody in a service, or I call somebody and say, I missed you at church, meaning I noticed you weren't there.
Right.
But when we say I miss you, that typically is equated with an emotional feeling of, some sort of sorrow, like, I sure wish you were here and I'm sad that you're not, right? So the way we say it, I missed you or I miss you, but what we're talking maybe more specifically about, I miss you. Oh, I miss you too. Okay, that sounds like an emotional thing. Like, yes, I have this feeling that, oh, I sure wish you were here, and I just think about you, and I'm sad you're not here. So okay.
Well, I don't know if it's taken to mean that I thought of you a lot, and I sat there kind of contemplating you. I don't know that's really the case, because I mean, there is some truth to the whole out of sight, out of mind thing for a lot of people.
Even with people, I mean, really.
Yeah, that is true. But if we take it to mean that when I did think of you, I regretted that we weren't together, I think that's fair to say, well, I missed you too. If that means then, when I did think of you, if I did think of you, I would have regretted that we weren't together. Or you could just simply bail out on the question entirely and say, well, I'm here now. So, when someone says, man, I really missed you, instead of saying I missed you too, you could just, well, I'm here now. So,
well, see, I asked the question, I said, I asked this young man, do you feel, if someone said, I miss you, would you feel awkward or would it sound arrogant to you if you said, well, thank you? Meaning, wow, you missed me, thanks. Would that be an out to not feel that you have to respond in kind? And he said, yeah. That would make, if I told somebody in my family, I love you, and they said, thank you.
That's an awkward thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll confess, probably I've done that in the past. And I'm probably more up for the awkward or whatever.
Right.
But anyway.
So you're okay with it being awkward so long as it's honest?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably so.
That's fair.
Because I remember telling somebody years back, we were driving home from camp and I told one of our interns, I don't miss anybody. And they're like, oh, you don't miss anybody. But and there's really an exception to that. I do miss my wife and I do miss my kids. I miss my wife even sometimes before she goes. She's still in the driveway or in the house, getting ready to go, and I miss her.
You're trying to backtrack now, aren't you? In case she listens to this.
Honey, you're hedging. The episode number. But so yeah, okay. Do I miss a little bit? Yeah, maybe I'm getting soft or whatever. But to say, oh, I miss you. So do you feel like, going back to the platitude, saying, okay, if you define it as I thought of you and when I thought of you, I was sad you weren't here.
Yeah. Or if I had thought of you.
Had I actually even thought of you in the last 6 months, I might have felt a tinge of sadness.
Well, the reason I say it...
Had I actually remembered your name when I thought about you.
The reason I say it, okay, personal example. I'm here at the church where I was a member for 6 years, where I was called to the ministry. I was, in very many ways, discipled here and prepared for ministry here.
Yeah.
There are friends that I have here that I consider close personal friends, but I don't see them or really talk to them until I'm here again. And I was just talking with a couple of them last night. And can I honestly say that I thought of them a lot in the past, I don't know, it's been 3 or 4 years since I've been here. Mm-hmm. No, honestly, I haven't, because I have an entire life that I live elsewhere.
Right. Yeah.
But when I left them, I regretted that I had to leave them. And when I see them, I'm glad that I'm with them, and I'm going to regret leaving them again. Mm. And when I see them, I pick right up where we left off. And I always find them encouraging when I talk to them. I think that would be fair in a scenario to say to someone like that I do miss them, in a sense. They do leave something out of my life that I appreciate. But do I think of them all the time? Am I just heartbroken all the time where I live that, I don't get to see Jerry again or whatever? No, but I love them, right? Mm-hmm. And when I'm with them, it's just like we never left. Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean,
am I overcomplicating the definition of I miss you?
Well, no, not necessarily. It's just a definition, and there may be different definitions, but you're basically saying, when I think of you and I realize, it would be nice to be with that person, but I'm not, then I could say to them, if they say, well, we sure missed you, say, I miss you too. Even though that's in the present tense.
Yeah.
You mean that when I think of you, I remember you fondly.
Yeah. So to bring this maybe around to maybe a biblical illustration, does it make you feel like a total sap when you read some of Paul's salutations that he writes, his introductions, I should say, to his letters, where he says things like, making mention of you in my prayers.
Always.
Like, always, and like remembering you. I forget how he says it, remembering you night and day or something like that. I forget. But just read any of his greetings there. And it's almost like, wow, I feel like a sap because I don't think about people very much that I haven't seen in a long time. But yet he seems to remember all these people and prays for all of them every day. Either that or people are going to accuse Paul of making platitudes.
All right. Now you have to make it convicting. Thank you very much.
Let me see if I can find an example.
Now don't find an example.
I got to find an example. I know it's going to hurt.
Already has. Knock it off.
All right. Colossians 1:3. We give thanks to God and the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, praying always for you, since we heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and of the love which you have to all the saints. So he says he's praying always for them. There's another one. I think Philippians is another good one. He says, I thank my God upon every remembrance of you. Now that's interesting. That's interesting. Because he doesn't say he always remembers them, but he's essentially saying whenever I do, I thank my God upon every remembrance of you. But, hold on, verse 4. Always in every prayer of mine for you all making request with joy. Mm-hmm.
Always in every prayer of mine for you all making request with joy.
Yeah.
So in every prayer of mine for you all.
Right.
But when he prays for them, he's making requests with joy. Wow. He's a pretty thoughtful guy. Interesting. But yes, but that's also an interesting noticing there in Philippians 1:3, I thank my God upon every remembrance of you. When I remember you, on that remembrance, I thank God. So now it's not using the word miss, but it does, but it's a similar, I guess, part of the discussion. And I want to tie it to this too, because, again, my wife mentioned this. She said that's similar to the discussion on love. When I say I love you, what do we mean by that? Do we mean that I feel something about you, or can we ever say to someone, can we ever shake their hand and look at them and say I love you, and we really don't care for the person? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's normal, and yet it's human. It's pharisaical when he said, do you love those that just love you? Are you kind to those that are just kind to you? Well, even the publican, whoever it was, he said, do the same, but ours is supposed to be more. To me, I would say, well, you comment on that first. What about saying, I love you?
Well, I mean, I think we would both agree that love would involve some sort of sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
But does it always mean that you have to have already sacrificed something for them to say that you love them?
No.
No. And that's kind of the point I was trying to make. And in my mind, I'm going back to some of the friends I have here, is that I don't know that we've ever been in a situation where I've had to really sacrifice anything great for them. Mm-hmm. We've just been friends. But there are friends that I have here that absolutely I would sacrifice something for.
Sure.
Sure. I would put myself into something for them because they matter to me. So can I say that I love that person? Yeah, I think I could. Yeah.
Yeah, and even though you're saying people that you haven't had to sacrifice for yet, but what about people that you don't feel, for lack of a better term, stirred about emotionally, like you don't have a warm spot in your heart for them.
Yeah.
They're kind of annoying to you, or you in your humanness, you say, I really don't care if I had seen you today or not.
I have a lot of humanness, apparently.
You're very human. All right. Just so you know, Tom is very human. Unless you thought he was
curmudgeonly.
But, my take is, yes, you can. If in your mind you're making the choice to say, I would do what I could do to move you closer to Christ.
Right. Well, and you can't discount, too, and I know this personally, that I have people in my life who I never felt overly moved towards. Mm-hmm. But when they had something happen in their life where they really needed something and I was available to fill that need, mm-hmm. I felt moved and I did something. Because though they had not overly affected me up to that point, when I saw their need, I was moved with compassion. So just because you don't necessarily feel like you might love someone now, maybe they annoy you, it doesn't mean that you won't later, right?
By love them, you mean feel something, feel moved, or love them as in it doesn't mean you won't sacrifice to help meet a legitimate need later?
No, well, what I mean is, from a personal example, someone who was maybe kind of irritating to me. When I saw that they had a plight or they had a need, I was moved with compassion and I helped them. Even though I never would have imagined doing that earlier. It wasn't until they had that need and the Lord said, well, you can fill that need, that I did. And I had a different response toward them when they had a need. And I think maybe sometimes the nature of relationships changes when we're relatively unmolested versus when there is need. There's people who I would go to a funeral of their loved one and have compassion on them and grieve with them, who prior to that time, I never felt overly moved towards. Right? In fact, maybe they were annoying to me. Maybe I disagreed with them. But when I saw that their heart was broken, I was affected by that. And in a sense, am I giving up some of my time to go help them? Yes. Am I giving up some of my resources to help them? Yes. So in a sense, that is loving them. But yet it didn't seem to really happen until they had a need.
But would you feel like you could have said to that person prior to being affected by their need that I love you? Meaning, could you have made the choice to say, when, I'd be willing to do in my power something that would move you toward Christ. However God might have me interact with you in the future, I'm willing to do it. In other words, my saying I love you is more a response to God than it is to this person.
Yeah, I could say in some cases, yeah, I would say that. And I don't know whether it's fleshly or not. I really don't know. I'd have to think about it. But there are times where I really don't feel something. In fact, I feel the antithesis of what might feel like love towards someone. And it's usually not because of a personal annoyance. It's usually based on some sort of disloyalty to Christ or to myself. And that's why I say I don't know if this is fleshly or not, because I could love someone immensely when they're walking with the Lord and when there's a like-mindedness with us. But it's almost like I feel it in my flesh when someone says, "No, I'm going to go a different way than that." I can feel my flesh saying, "I no longer care about them," and that's a challenge of the flesh. And whether or not I could say, do I still love them when they're totally disloyal? Do I still love them when they've turned their back on the Lord? That's a harder thing. In fact, in many ways, if you can accomplish that, perhaps that is more of an example of love than when things are going well.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful there still to remember, again, what is love? To say, well, love means always feeling something for someone, or it means doing something nice for them.
Right.
Well, what does that mean? When Paul said, I've turned them over, or something, right. or if I come, boy, you guys better have taken care of this problem, because when I come, we're going to take care of the problem. Is that loving? Absolutely, that's loving.
Sure.
It's doing what needs to be done in their life to move them closer to Christ. So it might mean separating from them. It might mean putting the brethren out of the assembly for his own good, to show him, no, we can't stand that kind of sin in the body.
Right.
And in some ways, disassociating, is that loving? Yes, that's loving. And so, but we often feel that he has his disloyalty, or he's done something that causes me not to be affected by him, therefore I don't love him. That's not necessarily true. Now it's just, God, how am I supposed to interact with him given his choice of state?
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of a can of worms, really, in many ways. And a lot of people debate that what you've just brought up is, some who are very anti-separation would say that we just have to forgive everything and let everything go, because that's what Christ did for us when we were yet in our sins. And essentially make an argument that we should never, as Paul said, turn them over for the destruction of the flesh, right? So then you see Paul doing something like that, turning them over to the destruction of the flesh. You have to wonder, what makes the difference? What makes the difference? And part of me has to think of maybe Christ and Israel when they just utterly rejected him. It wasn't just that they'd done something against him. They'd committed themselves to an anti-Christ life. And at that point, he essentially turns his attention to the institution of the church. So you have to wonder, am I still loving someone when I have, in a sense, turned them over, as you say? But then am I being the arbiter of their life, saying, okay, what have they done now? Are they committed? I'm having to make a decision. Are they committed to an unchrist-like life? And then, am I making sense here?
Some, I think you're going back to, you're saying, where's the line? And I have to make a decision. Yeah, but I think that decision still falls pretty well along the lines of what, the Lord said in his word, that there is some, but I guess when it comes down to that decision, when they say he walks disorderly among us, what does that mean?
Yeah.
How bad is disorderly? When do we kick a guy out? Yeah. There's going to have to be a decision in there. Yeah. And that becomes tough.
Wow. Man, we've really kind of jumped from one thing to the next here.
Well, those two concepts of loving somebody and missing somebody, I guess they're not exactly the same, but to talk about missing, anyway, I think that discussion on love is neat, but to go back to the idea of missing someone, in at least maybe we could say it depends on your definition of miss.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And if, so...
Can I just pause for a second and reiterate how weird this feels to be recording in person?
Yeah.
Do you not sense this? It's like...
It's a little different.
It's a little different. It's like I'm having a hard time concentrating because I'm in a different environment here. It's messing with my routine.
He's getting irritated with me, and he's not being affected by me. No.
Anyway. Here's one that I want to bring up.
Okay.
And this will maybe lead into your mother's question. Because your mother wrote in and asked a question.
Yes.
And interestingly, I had already put this in here, and she asked a related question, so I think we've got to cover it for that reason.
Wow, okay.
The question about when you get around Easter time of the year, if you call it Easter, I call it Resurrection Sunday.
Right, I do too. And can I say why?
Go ahead.
Because... And for most people, and it's okay if you call it Easter, whatever. I don't consider you a pagan, or whatever. Yeah. It's just for me, knowing what I do, I believe the word Easter comes from the word Ishtar, essentially, which is basically a god, right? A pagan god of some sort.
Yeah.
This might have been, kind of brought into Catholicism.
I think that's more, and I'd have to go back and look at this, but I think that's more related to the atheist accusation against Easter.
Okay.
Is that they say it comes from Ishtar, which is a pagan god. But if I remember right from my research a little while ago, and listeners write in and correct me if I'm wrong, it had to do with a spring festival named after what was alleged to be a god named Eostre. I forget it's about Eostre, Eostre, something like that. And oftentimes when you try to look up any kind of existence of such a pagan god related to the celebration of Resurrection Day in the Christian faith, you really can only find one obscure reference, of any such pagan god by that name. Either name. And that's why when people say, well, Easter is named after a pagan god, for us to argue against that, we're kind of biting into the atheist straw man against Easter that's not really related to a celebration of a pagan god. If I can remember that right from my research, and I don't have it in front of me, but it was more related to actually a directional word from the east, right? Something having to do with spring and the rising of the sun in the east, whatever. I can't remember.
That's interesting. I'd be curious in looking into Hislop's The Two Babylons. He's got a lot of stuff in there, I think, about the paganism coming into the Roman church. I'll have to look in there, see if he has anything to say on that.
Okay,
but go ahead.
But anyway, to get back to the question is, people will often ask me, and they're usually Roman Catholic people that will ask me this around Easter time. They'll say, boy, busy time of year for you.
Really?
And I never know quite how to respond to that, because for an independent Baptist pastor, I don't know that Resurrection Sunday time of the year is any busier than any other time of the year. It's just busy.
Life is just...
Right. It's just busy. But for some reason, I think maybe Roman Catholic people think maybe just more people are going to church this time of year, or there's more holy days this time of year or whatever. I don't know what they think I do that's different this time of year. Do you ever get people asking you that?
No.
No? Okay.
But I mean, I could see where some churches obviously make a big day of Resurrection Sunday or Easter, so maybe they have a program.
Yeah.
But those same churches probably might have half a dozen, 4 big days during the year, or this conference and that week of meetings and this special day and this outing and this that. So I mean, that wouldn't be their only busy time of year. But I don't know what.
I was thinking about it, and I thought, well, maybe it's related to Lent, because Roman Catholic folks tend to observe Lent, which has a couple of different celebrations, we might call them, or some rituals or rites surrounding it.
Okay.
And maybe they think that's why I'm busy, because they think that I actually celebrate those things. And have you ever noticed that people are confused when they ask you about, what are you giving up for Lent? And you're like, nothing, don't celebrate it. do you not even get that discussion here?
I probably have had one or two ask me about Lent, and I don't know if they ask me about Lent, but more reference it in terms of them.
Yeah.
Do
you, what's your level of familiarity with Lent?
Minimal. I looked into it and read on it a little bit, but I certainly can't. I mean, the general concept is basically giving up something for 40 days, as I understand it. Is that right? Or 9?
Yeah, it's 40. It turns out to be 46.
Yeah, because with the days, Sundays or something. Yeah. 40 days of giving up something prior to Easter.
Right.
Which I get, is that basically supposed to focus the mind on?
It's supposed to focus the mind on holiness and righteousness and recommitment to the Lord. But are you familiar with Carnival and Mardi Gras and Fat Tuesday? You familiar with those?
Okay, I mean, just barely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what would you say is the logical thing if you're going to spend 40 days going off of, I don't know, white lies or donuts or Netflix or whatever? If you're going to spend 40 days away from that, what would you say the logical thing to do is the day before you start?
Binge watch Netflix while I'm eating a dozen donuts.
You have just described Mardi Gras and Fat Tuesday. That is essentially what that is.
Wow.
So Lent begins on Ash Wednesday, they call it.
Okay.
And that's the day where they go get the holy smudge on their forehead.
They really call it that, or are you just being funny?
I'm just being being a little sarcastic. Okay, forgive me. I'm being a little bit cantankerous, but if you listen to this podcast any length of time, that's me. I get a little cantankerous every once in a while. But no, Ash Wednesday, of course, is the day before Lent begins, or the day that Lent begins on that day, and they go get the ashes in the shape of a cross on their forehead. Which I'm gonna look something up in Matthew chapter 6 in just a second, because there's something interesting Jesus actually says about something like that. But the day before Ash Wednesday is called Fat Tuesday, and the reason they call it Fat Tuesday is because it is the last day to get all of your debauchery in before your 40 days
for 40 days
of what you give up. And prior to Fat Tuesday, so we're moving backwards on the calendar, there's like a week-long celebration in many Catholic countries called Carnival. Which is essentially an entire week of all sorts of, licentiousness, we might call it.
Yeah.
And then that culminates on Fat Tuesday, which in the U.S. is Mardi Gras, which if you know anything about Mardi Gras in the U.S., it's a terrible, terrible thing.
And that's not quite the depiction of holiness that we might want.
No, not at all. So you have to ask the question, is somebody really interested in holiness and righteousness? If they're going to spend Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras doing all sorts of very licentious and promiscuous things.
Yeah, or is it just being imposed on them? What you're saying?
If the 40 days is being imposed on them, yeah,
right.
Yeah. No, I would have to say that maybe their heart's not in it. If they're willing to do that on Fat Tuesday or Mardi Gras, just so they can have 40 days, without doing it, and then after that, just go right back to everything as it was. Anyway, all that to say, people ask me, are you any busier this time of year? And the answer is typically no, because I don't celebrate Carnival or Mardi Gras or Fat Tuesday or Ash Wednesday or Lent. And then even Easter, I don't call it Easter, right? Because it's just simpler to call it what it is. It's Resurrection Sunday. There was a verse I was going to look up, and if I remember right, yeah, it's Matthew 6 and verse 18. This is kind of the go-to verse regarding like Ash Wednesday. Jesus himself says, moreover, when ye fast, this is verse 16, be not as the hypocrites of a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces that they might appear unto men to fast. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou fastest, anoint thine head and wash thy face, that thou appear not unto men to fast, but unto thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. Essentially, there was a practice, and you can look up cultural practices, it's not that hard, but the cultural practice of some in those days was when they were going to go on a fast, typically no one would know about it if you just fasted. Mm-hmm. The only way they would know about it is if they offered you food and you turned them down for some reason. They asked why, and then you'd have to tell them, I'm fasting. But there were some in the culture then that would kind of embrace the emaciated look.
Yeah.
and they would purposefully make themselves look as ashen and grave as possible, like they're starving, because they want everyone to know, I'm a sanctified person, I'm fasting.
Yeah, right.
And Jesus says the important thing is that you fast between you and God. Not that people can never know about it, but it's ideal that your fast be between you and God.
Just like you pray in your closet, you give, you give quietly, and so then that way you still have to live among people, but you don't make it obvious what you're doing.
Right. And essentially, Ash Wednesday is kind of the opposite of this. It's telling everyone that you are about to partake in a 40-day fast from something.
That's interesting.
And then typically throughout that 40 days, if you're like me and you're out in the world with people, they'll ask you, so what are you giving up for Lent? Not knowing that you don't celebrate it. So it's a point of conversation now where people ask each other, what are you giving up? What are you giving up? And it kind of disregards the whole idea of keeping this thing
how long are you fasting?
In secret. Right. Exactly.
Where are you fasting from?
There was what was it? At the wedding rehearsal dinner the other day, you said something interesting to me. And then I was joking with you about self-righteousness. You remember that? How did that conversation go?
No, I'm trying to remember. Okay.
I remember what it was. Dinner. It was at the wedding reception.
Okay.
And there was cake there.
Yes.
And I think I mentioned this on the podcast before. I'm doing a no added sugar thing, right? For 2 years.
Okay.
And I realize that people might think I'm contradicting what I'm saying here, but the point of me doing that is because I feel better. And there's a history of certain things in my family, and I don't want to get that. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to avoid those things for health reasons. It's not for any kind of religious reason. But I think you'd asked me or something if I was going to have some of that or something. I'm like, no, I'm going to have the fruit. And I jokingly said, it's always easier to stick with some sort of nutrition plan if you get a little self-righteous about it.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
And we had a good laugh over that. But that is, in a sense, what Lent has become, is it's kind of an opportunity for people to, in a sense, enact a little bit of self-righteousness about what they're fasting from for 40 days. And yet begin and end the whole thing with debauchery and vice.
Yeah, the opposite of righteousness.
Right.
Which I can think of a couple people that come to mind when I think about that word Lent, who probably said something about Lent. And I would say they'd be fairly sincere people, and in their mind they're probably thinking, this is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And the whole concept of saying, yeah, can I deny myself something to focus on the Lord is a great concept, but the way that it's institutionalized and used to the whole purpose, I'd say, or the whole environment of the Catholic sphere, isn't. Anyway, just.
Where is your mother's question here? Because this kind of leads into that.
I don't think I ever wrote it down.
I thought it was in here.
Email. Let me see here.
I'm pretty sure I'd copied it in here, but maybe I haven't. If I remember right, it was basically a question about churches doing Easter egg hunts.
Yeah.
Remember that? Whether or not that's conflicting information.
Okay.
All right. Here is your mother's question. She says, I can't believe I'm actually doing this, as I don't communicate well and I'm definitely tech challenged. I'd like to hear your opinions regarding a church sponsoring an Easter egg hunt after Sunday morning service. It feels like I'm already fighting an uphill battle in Sunday school, competing with the world in trying to instill values and build character consistent with Scripture. To have to enthusiastically identify with a worldly tradition at church doesn't feel right. Ideas? Advice? I've listened to every broadcast and after show. I look forward to each broadcast. Keep up the good work. Kathleen.
So as far
Thanks,
as...
Mom.
Yes, thank you, Mom, for writing in. And she had mentioned this to me over the phone, and it's not so much even the fact that maybe a family decides to do something. It's the church sponsoring that activity. For us as a family, we on Resurrection Sunday, we do, now people might be like mortified by this or whatever, but be like, oh, the chicken whole thing, but it's actually the Peeps, the little marshmallow Peeps.
Yeah.
That we hide Peeps all over the house, and they go on a peep hunt, and we have fun hiding them, and they have fun looking for them and eating them. And so anyway, I don't know that has to have like a reference to like the chicken from which the egg came on Easter and all that stuff like that. I can't say I'm like a huge egg hunt fan myself, because again, we've probably sanctified it and said the egg is a sign of new life, right. But I think there's more to it than that historically. But anyway, the question is going back to, okay, now what do you do in your home? You color eggs, you hunt for eggs. But what about the church saying, oh, we're having a church Easter egg hunt? What's your take on that?
Well, I would have to know whether or not it's proving to be a distraction from the important subject. And that's I think that answer is going to vary depending on who you're with and where you are. I think for some kids, for some families, for some churches, that would dramatically distract people from really the most important thing at hand, which is the subject of the resurrection. And I suppose if an entire church of people is mature enough to not be distracted from the important subject, then in theory, you could do an Easter egg hunt after church and it not be a problem. But we're talking about kids here largely, which get excited about things, oftentimes inordinately so. So to do something like an Easter egg hunt, they might just be anticipating that for the whole day. And totally miss the subject of the resurrection of Christ. I see.
So the issue is one of having what do you call that? A draw, what's
a gimmick.
A gimmick. And I don't mean that necessarily in a derogatory way, because churches use a lot of gimmicks. They might say, well, there's ways that you incentivize your children sometimes for doing good. Okay, I get it. That's another discussion, sort of. Mm-hmm. But okay, so we're talking about, is the incentive to come more powerful than what you're coming for?
Right.
So, and obviously you say, well, that's why they're coming. It's because of the incentive. And that could be a big problem. So in saying, hey, if you come, we're going to do this. And that we're going to do, i.e. the egg hunt, is so powerful in the child's mind that he doesn't really much care what you do in class.
Yeah.
He could fall asleep. He's thinking about, when we get done, we're going to do this and I'm going to get this.
Right.
Yeah.
It is, in a sense, like your mother said, competing with the world in many ways. Though I can't identify, hunting for Easter eggs as a purely worldly activity. I don't know that I'd be willing to say that, though the world does it. And there's nothing inherently worldly about searching for a plastic bubble, out in the grass. But you are competing, in a sense, with a different practice in a lot of ways. And I can see how that would make someone like a Sunday school teacher a little frustrated, because they're the one that's on kind of the front line of dealing with the children in church. And they can see when a kid is distracted, when all a kid wants to do is get to the prize at the end of the day. I can see how that might make a teacher feel a little bit undermined.
I remember years ago in our children's ministry, this was years ago, teachers get into this thing of giving candy. Mm-hmm. And now candy has become so prevalent in our society, and it's dirt cheap. And so teachers are buying candy all the time. And kids love candy, and they'll do stuff for sugar that they... so you get into this habit of, you answer this question, I give you a candy. Right. Oh, you do this, and I'll give you a candy. Until finally they become entitled. That's what you owe them. If I'm going to do this, you owe me and so all of a sudden, I have to answer a question without, anyway. So we were in a children's ministry, and I said, and I asked a kid something like, can you tell me whatever? And I don't remember what the question was exactly. And he said, what will I get? Or I will if you give me candy. And I determined pretty much right there, that's it. We're done with candy. And it was a while. I mean, and from that point, I probably did very little giving away. Not saying I never threw out candy after that, but it would be more of a sporadic thing where just, on a certain week you might come in and start having fun, and everybody ends up with one. But But anyway, it was just, oh goodness.
Well, in a sense, doing it by your grace, not as an incentive.
Yes.
That to me seems like a better thing.
But when it becomes such a part of the machinery, this question really does border. It's right on the cliff of you slipping into another conversation, which we don't have time to get into right now. But of the whole use of incentives.
Yeah.
If we're incentivizing every week and it's always something bigger and it's something this and it's something that, at what point are we teaching them, right is a reward? I mean, doing right, learning this thing and coming to learn and to seek God and to know Him is better than a chocolate egg,
right. Well, and maybe this would be a good thing for the after show and this has kind of been on my mind lately too, and it came up in conversation about weddings because we were just at one, is how it's like what areas of the Christian life do we end up oftentimes borrowing more cultural traditions from the world as opposed to creating our own? And is there a benefit to creating our own? I think we could take that into the after show.
Yeah, actually, we're going to stop that and move on into the after show.
Yeah.
This discussion is going to roll on.
Yeah,
this is good. And so,
if you want to hear the after show, you need to be an elite patron, not a standard patron, not a premium patron. Got to be an elite patron. So if you'd like to upgrade, you can do that at patreon.com/reasontogether, or you can join up for the first time and you'll get yourself a free t-shirt as an elite patron, and you'll get access to the after show bonus episodes. Anyway.
Encouraging balance, developing perspective, and connecting faith to practice. This is Reason Together.